Computer, yep. And over to you.
Are
If I
you
could
going
ask
to
you all to go mute, please.
are you going to make everyone a host as well? Was that?
I've already done that.
Well, I don't see a little thing that says host for me. Perhaps more. Should I go on to more? Oh, I
Organ.
see it now. I've got it. I've got it.
Okay,
I hope. And oops, hold on.
that's it.
Yeah, hold on. It's yeah. That's
That's it. That's
is that
perfect.
it?
Yep,
Okay. Can you all hear me? I presume you're all muted. So
yep. We can all hear you. So over to you,
okay.
Gillian.
Right. So these are the stormiest seas in the world, and in man's seafaring history, no other series has been undertaken in such bad weather and in such small boats. Wait, there's just something in the middle of my screen, which I'm going to, one of those little grey boxes. Can you see that or not? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yes, so these journeys all on purpose. Even the Vikings would have waited for summer weather before they invaded our shores. But these little boats traveled through darkness, fog, and extreme cold, and to land on an unlit, guarded coast of Norway. So the North Sea and the Northeast Atlantic was a no man's land for shipping. Patrolled by German aircraft. And these little boats really, if they were attacked, they had not much hope because any safety was hundreds of miles away. But before I go any further with this, I just thought it'd be quite good to give an account of a journey that was undertaken in November 1941. So, of course, you know that the war was already well on its way. And these trips always took place during the winter. So the summer time was when they were repairing the boats, but because of, as you know, the long uh, daylight hours in Norway, it was really best to travel in the darkness and in stormy conditions. So this is exactly what this was happening here. So November 41. This little boat that you see in this picture is called the Arthur. And the Arthur on this journey had a crew of seven, skippered by a man called Leif Larsen. His name will pop up quite frequently. So they'd completed their mission over to Norway successfully and were just heading back to the Shetland Isles. However, of course, in those days they had they didn't have the weather forecast that we have today, so they had no idea that they were heading into the worst hurricane of the century. With this boat, there was another little boat called the Bleer. The Bleer had also successfully traveled over to Norway and was about to return. It was at a little pier, and 80 desperate refugees trying to escape the Gestapo arrived. Of course, a little boat like that couldn't take 80. It took 38, and the rest were held back at gunpoint. So the Bleer and the Arthur, the two little boats, headed into this hurricane. And it was the Arthur that was to give the account. So they said they set sail in good weather, but a few hours later it was blowing so hard that they decided to head for the northerly islands of Shetland. But at dawn the following morning, they were really within a few miles of the islands, but now they were facing hurricane force winds and 100 mile an hour winds and steep. Of course, you can imagine what the sea was like. But Larsen, the skipper, decided to lie stern to wind till daylight. But the mizzen sail was still set. So Sangolt, who'd been in the wheelhouse with Larsen, offered to or volunteered to go and bring in the sail. But just as he crossed or left the wheelhouse, two enormous waves broke over the ship. The wheelhouse door was broken, and the engine was flooded, and it was stopped. All hands were on deck were to pump out and bail out, so to get the engine going, because obviously it was important to keep the little boat facing into the wind. Otherwise, really, they had no hope. So eventually they got the engine going, but it was only an hour or so later that they realized that Sangolt was missing. Only took a minute or two to realize that he'd been swept into the wilderness of the sea. This discovery made the younger members of the crew feel that death was very near to them, but they didn't relax their fight. This began 4 days and nights of nightmarish action. So long as they could keep this engine going, they might just have a chance of surviving this storm. The 6 surviving crew and 1 passenger would often cram into that little wheelhouse, which was only 6 by 4 feet. So there was no lying down or resting. It was just leaning against each other, totally exhausted. So for 4 days, the storm beat upon them, the men growing weaker and less able to hold the boat on course. But as if that wasn't bad enough, one evening they were attacked twice by an aircraft, firing a burst of cannon fire at them. Looking back, some of the crew began to think that it was a hallucination, but later the star-shaped scar of a cannon shell was found on the Arthur's hull, and none of them in the storm had even heard it explode. On the evening of the 4th day, they began to feel a slight moderation of the wind and the seas becoming a little less steep. At dawn the following day, they began to see land, and it was the Shetland island of Fetla. In the early afternoon, the men at the Shetland port of Lana heard the sound that only a Norwegian fishing boat makes, and that is a tonk, tonk, tonk sound. It's from a little exhaust on the roof of the wheelhouse. It was a sound they'd been praying to hear because both boats were 5 days overdue. It was, of course, the Arthur that came round the headland into Lunavo, and its mast was lying in the stern in a tangle of rigging. The bulwarks were smashed and the gun mountain swept off her decks. But she was a fine little boat. She hadn't suffered anything worse than that. However, as the days passed, the anxiety for the Bleer increased. And of course, at that point, they wouldn't have known that this little boat had 38 extra passengers. And so basically it had no hope. So those are the sort of stories that keep me turning the pages in the middle of the night. This is no novel. These journeys really did happen. So let's go back to where and why such trips as this started. As many of you know, in September 1939, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark declared their neutrality. And it was later in April 1940 that Norway was invaded. The German plan was to capture King Haakon and Crown Prince Olav and their government, and forcing the country to surrender immediately. Here we have Hitler talking to Vidkun Quisling, who he put in charge of the Norwegians. And of course, quisling is a byword for collaborator and traitor to this day. And anyone who sided with the Nazis was also called a quisling. But at the start of the invasion, the German battleship, the Blucher, was sunk in Oslo Fjord by the Norwegians, and 1,300 men were killed in the process. But it was becoming clear that Norway, who had not, of course, expected to be attacked, would be unable to withstand this German force. But the sinking of this ship gave the royal family, the king and Crown Prince Olav, time to flee from Oslo. This was on the 7th of June, 1940. They escaped on the British cruiser, the Devonshire, there at the bottom of the picture. At the same time as the king escaped and was brought over to Britain, anything that could set sail from Norway, so fishing boats, trawlers, yachts, even rowing boats, took to the sea and headed for Shetland. And of course, this was June, so the sea conditions were much easier. If many of them couldn't go by sea, a lot of them crossed the Swedish border and basically had to travel all the way around the world to get to Britain. And that was another way out of that. But on the night of the 9th of April, 1940, at the invitation of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Crown Princess Martha and the 3 younger children crossed the border and went down to the USA, where she spent the rest of the war promoting the Norwegian interests there, while her husband, the king, was over here in Britain. So he was here. And so for the next 5 years, with the help of the British for consulting regarding strategies and sabotage, and also to reorganize their army and to train it and equip it. So this is where we British came in to the rescue. As many of you know, some of you, or 1 or 2 of you, might have been to my talk down at Tangier this last summer. The SOE was set up in July 1940. It was set up to establish and maintain permanent contact with resistance movements and to work behind enemy lines. 1 or 2 of you may remember that my father was an SOE agent. Here we have Colonel John Skinner. He's the chap on the left there with a cap. And actually, they've all got caps, sorry. He was appointed head of operations, SOE operations Norway, and actually masterminded the heavy water mission at Telav'g. So let's look at setting up of the Shetland Bus. The aim was to transport between Britain and Norway, and the object was to land men and cargo without the Nazis' knowledge, and to bring back refugees escaping the Gestapo. So the little fishing boats, this of course is the Bleer, the one that was lost in the story I gave to you earlier on. But this is a typical fishing boat, Norwegian fishing boat. MK stands for motor ketch. And they were 2-masted, high in the bow, and you can actually see there the little exhaust pipe there on the right of the wheelhouse, which emitted this tonk 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 sound. So why fishing boats for Norway? Norway really has Norway is not suitable for parachute landings. As many of you know, it has unstable weather and mountainous terrain. And it was deemed that actually these little fishing boats would carry a good amount of arms and ammunition and equipment into Norway. So the Norwegian coast has also, or what was eroded during the Ice Age into fjords, and along the coast little islands were sort of broken off from the coast there, which forms a channel which was, and still is, I'm sure, used by fishing boats. So this was very useful. So Norwegian boats had to be used. They were seaworthy for long voyages, small enough to approach the coast. And once they did, they were similar to other boats that were fishing along there. But the Nazis tried to control boats. All boats had to have passes. They had to have these for regular checks, and controls were varied, hoping they'd catch out the Shetland Bus or anyone else doing something they didn't approve of. But the Shetland Bus managed to keep ahead on the whole of these, with these controls. Anyone who escaped to Norway would be asked to give as much information as possible. Another thing, any fishing boat was restricted to a 50-mile radius from the coast. So no boat could cross over that line. It meant that the Shetland Bus boats coming over from Shetland, of course, had to cross that line either in stormy conditions or in total darkness, because that line was patrolled by German aircraft. And so that they had to cross that, and then in the morning be so-called fishing along the coast with the other boats. Weaponry on the boats for defensive use only. Obviously, they didn't want to, they weren't going to be shooting and causing a nuisance. They were there for one purpose, to take in arms and ammunition and supplies and bring people out. But to begin with, they only had handguns. But eventually they had Colt machine guns mounted in the bow of the boat, and they had this quite ingenious system. They had here, as you can see, an oil drum bolted onto the deck. Inside it were 2 Lewis machine guns, all ready loaded and on springs. And so if they were under attack, the lid of the oil drum was slid off, the guns were up and ready to fire in 30 seconds. Another thing that they devised was that in the roof of the wheelhouse, they had a parachute rocket, I should say the rocket, which if they were under attack from an aeroplane, that rocket would be shot up, and at its height, a parachute would come out and a steel wire would dangle down. So no aeroplane, of course, wants to get involved in a steel wire. So that was extremely, extremely useful. This picture is a real thrill to me, because I gave this talk. I live down in East Sussex near Tunbridge Wells, and I gave this talk in the area just before COVID, and the talk happened, and after a couple of months later, the organizer said that there was someone who wanted to be in contact with me. So I said, fine. So it turns out that this lady had been clearing out her father-in-law's garage, and here she found this oil painting. And because of my talk, she realized what it was. It had Scalloway on the back, and it had 1940 or 41 on it. So she knew that her father-in-law, although he'd never said anything, of course, here was the Shetland Bus. And it's a great painting because they look so they've got sort of guns, but you can just imagine they would just ping off, any bullets would ping off the fuselage. So jolly scary. The Shetland Bus sailors, who were they? Many of them escaped at the same time as the king, but they kept on coming. They were civilian volunteers and they were paid £4 a week. And if they were asked to go on a mission, they got an extra £10. I haven't read anywhere where any of them refused to go. So jolly brave men. But as they came over, they would be sent down to London for debriefing. And if they were deemed to be suitable to continue, they were sent up into the Highlands and to the Cairngorms, those sort of Scottish areas where they had further training. At this point, this organisation, which we're calling the Shetland Bus, was officially called the Norwegian Naval Independent Unit, which is quite a mouthful, isn't it? There was one difficulty which was really never overcome. The base had to be under British command, and it was actually under the SOE command, but using Norwegian sailors and crews. The thing was that no British boat could have passed as a Norwegian fishing boat. No British crews could have had the local knowledge that the Norwegian men had. And if they had been marooned or on the Norwegian coast, they would have stood out like a sore thumb. So this organization had to be run by the British, with the Norwegians and all the help that the Norwegians could give them. So it really promoted a mutual loyalty, ultimately creating a great skill in their kind of warfare. The three British officers, here we have Major Leslie Mitchell. He'd been working in the British Embassy in Oslo before the war, so he obviously spoke Norwegian. I can only imagine he was our man in Oslo, so he was probably MI6. And he joined the Shetland Bus and really headed it. He was also joined in December 1940 by Sub-Lieutenant David Howarth. He was second in command. He was a naval officer. Before the war, he'd been working with Richard Dimbleby for the BBC. And during his young life, he'd spent a lot of the summers with his family sailing up and down the Norwegian coast. So he was desperate to get involved with this. So that is exactly what happened. But in 1941, they were joined by Major Arthur Slater. He's the one on the left there of the group of three with a cap on. And but he had to be called name changed to Major Arthur Rogers because his wife was Norwegian. And of course, if it had all gone terribly wrong, her family would have suffered in Norway probably pretty awfully. So he had to have a name change. So the Shetland Bus gets underway. To begin with, it starts from Lerwick. I should actually have a slide of Lerwick here, but sorry about that. Starts in 1940 and they have 15 missions and completed, but they decided that Lerwick really lacked security. So eventually they found this place, Lunnervoe, in 1941, Voe being a small sort of little harbour there. It had excellent anchorage and the only trouble, well, it had complete seclusion. So this is looking down onto that little harbour there with the Shetland Bus boats on it. But it was a bit vulnerable to sea attack and also there was no repair facilities. So this slide shows Lunner House there at the top on the right, looking down onto that harbour, and also a kirk or a church there, the Lunner Church there, also looking down across the harbour. So now let's have a brief look at some of the missions that they undertook. Many successful trips were completed, but then of course their luck was bound to run out on some occasions. The first was a mine-laying mission to Kristiansund, skippered by Leif Larsen, that name that's popping up. Once the mission was completed, they set off for Shetland in their boat, but another storm took hold, and this time their little boat didn't survive it. So they all got into the life raft and headed back to the Norwegian coast. They traveled hundreds of miles with the Gestapo hard on their heels. Eventually, they came back down to the coast and they found a little boat that was all fueled up for the winter fishing. And by pure chance, there was an air raid. So they got the engine going and they all climbed onto this boat and set sail for Shetland. And this little boat is the Arthur. This is the one that was in that first story. And this is how the Arthur became a Shetland bus. Another mission was to was skippered by a man called Ollie Grottel. And if any of you can speak Norwegian, I apologize for some of the names, the pronunciations. The first trip was deep down into a fjord, and they nearly got trapped down there. So the Shetland bus learned that they should never go too far down into a fjord because of that risk. There is Ollie and his 7-man crew. Later in the war were lost. Their boat vanished on a trip to Bergen in fine weather, and they never really found out what happened. Maybe they hit a mine or something like that. But what was certain, that every time any of these young men were lost, it was truly devastating for everyone back on the shore. Another mission was undertaken this time by a man called Old Joe and his crew. Old Joe's there on the left again with a really big cap on this time. And you can see Lunner House there, top left, that little house there. So they are in Lunnervaux there. And in September 41, they went to pick up a party of refugees, but they were betrayed. So these 3 men were arrested. Luckily, they were not shot. They obviously got away with it, but they were put into a concentration camp for the rest of the war. As Old Joe had escaped from Norway at the beginning of the war, his wife came with him, and his wife was working up at, or doing whatever she could at Lunner House, sort of cleaning or cooking, whatever. And she didn't know what had happened to her husband, and eventually, for security reasons, they couldn't even tell her. But it must have been an emotional moment when her husband reappeared at the end of the war. The final journey for the winter of 41, the task was to land agents with crates of arms and a radio transmitter. They picked up 7 refugees, including 3 children. And heading back, they were attacked 3 times from stern to bow with cannon fire from an aeroplane. They eventually fired back and the plane disappeared. But this young man, Niels Ness, had stuck to the wheel throughout the attack. He was seen to be hit in the leg and the head. He died an hour later. He was only 23. In a calm and winter sunshine, Niels was buried at Lanarkirk in the graveyard of the ancient little church there. His young Norwegian friends weeping during a Scottish service, they could hardly understand what the minister was saying. But after the last post, one of the Norwegians started singing their national anthem, and they all joined in. So the first winter was over. Many trips to Norway completed, many agents taken over, and tons of arms and equipment, and growing confidence in what they were doing and achieving. The following year of 1942, in a boat skippered by this man, Par Blistad, they landed 2 Norwegian resistant agents at the village of Telav'g. The agents were hidden in the village, but they were betrayed and the Gestapo arrived. The agents shot and killed 2 Gestapo officers, but they were arrested, they were captured, and the German reprisals on the village were savage. As the villagers watched, all their houses were burnt or destroyed, their boats were destroyed, their livestock taken away, and all the men between 16 and 60 were sent to concentration camps, where of course many of them would not return. The women and children were also imprisoned for 2 years, and probably quite a few of them didn't make it either. So the Telav'g tragedy ranks amongst one of the worst reprisal atrocities of World War II. It is pretty horrific that atrocities like this are happening in our day as well. In the spring of 42, the operations moved to Scalloway in Western Shetland. The advantages of Lanna had been its secrecy and its proximity to Norway, but the disadvantages had been it was, well, it still is remote, difficult to supply in winter. It is accessed by just a single track. You can see just above the water on the left, there's a little winding road. That's a single track road there. And so repairing the boats was becoming very difficult. And also, Lanna had no really social activities. Okay, it had Lanna House where the men could get a hot meal and a warm bed, but no drink in a pub or anything like that. So they decided to move to Scalloway. It had excellent anchorage and piers, and probably one of the most important things, it has an established, or had an established marine yard belonging to William Moore and Sons. And Moore was willing to let the Norwegian engineers work in the workshop with the Scalloway men. And there was also ready-made accommodation. Many of the men were taken in by the families there, and there must have been a few pubs to go and have a drink and that sort of thing. And I think a few love affairs happened, and some marriages even happened. There was no great security concern. Scalloway was a restricted area with discrete population, and it was had powerful village defences against air and sea attack. There was one disadvantage. You can see Lannavaux there on the east coast, quite close to Norway, Scalloway there on the west. But they decided that really wasn't a problem, and so they based themselves at Scalloway. One cheeky idea came to our Par Blistad there. On one occasion, he was marooned for a few days at a friendly Norwegian little port during a mission. And he realized that he could buy spare parts from the German-run factories in Norway for fishing boats. Of course, making or difficult to obtain spare parts in Shetland. They had to be made or whatever. So he bought or ordered, I should say, as much spare parts as he had money for. 2 or 3 weeks later, another Shetland bus sailed by and picked up the supplies. The British staff in Shetland suggested it was illegal to trade with the enemy, but they soon overcame that worry. And indeed, for the whole of World War II, the Shetland Bus were able to order spare parts for their shipping boats from the German-run factories, which is very satisfactory, isn't it? Sadly, these two men were to run out of luck. Baalsrud there on the left, and Berg. They went on an intelligence mission over to Norway in that boat, pretending that they were on a fishing expedition. They were really getting ready for the winter sailings across to Norway, but they were stopped and they were captured, and sadly they didn't make it. So again, devastating to lose such fantastic men. And Berg was apparently an excellent engineer as well. Moving on to the Aksel, the boat called the Aksel there, one of the Shetland Bus workhorses with 10 successful trips under its belt. Skippered by Baalsrud, he's the one on the left there smoking a pipe. He apparently was most charismatic skipper. He took a great delight in wearing half a uniform and half just ordinary clothes, just to annoy the British personnel. But he was a really popular skipper. So here they are on the Aksel, fitting out their boat at Moore's Pier there for a trip to Trane in December 42. The trip was successful, but on their way back, they sent out a message, 2 words: send help. A plane took off from Shetland. It saw the Aksel overturned. It saw the life raft with all the men on board, but they were never seen again. Presumably the plane that had done the deed came back and finished them off. There was a visit by Crown Prince Olav in 1942. He'd become Chief of Defence to open the pier there, which still stands there, which had been built jointly by the Norwegians and the Shetland men, or the Scalloway men. Apparently it was a relaxed and informal occasion, winning the affection and respect of the men, and raising morale to new heights, and really bringing official approval of their type of warfare. One David versus Goliath mission impossible was undertaken by our little boat, the Arthur. It was selected to destroy the world's largest battleship, the Tirpitz. The Tirpitz had approaching 53,000 tons, and it was bristling with anti-aircraft guns and all sorts of equipment. And of course, Hitler's pride and joy. Now, our little boat, the Arthur, was selected to destroy this battleship. It was going to, the plan was to use 2-man human torpedoes, or chariots as they were called. And during exercises, they described how this would work. 2 men in diving suits and breathing apparatus would enter the water. mounting and sitting astride the chariots with the torpedoes attached below them. And then with a faint hum and a swish of propellers, they would get going, sinking below the waves, and their plan, of course, was head to the Tirpitz to attach the warheads. So this was the challenge. The Tirpitz, 823 feet, the Arthur, 50 feet, and the Chariot just 18 feet. The plan was to transport the magnetic warheads and all the equipment camouflaged on the Arthur, and to tow the submerged chariots close, and then to the chariots to be released and head towards the Tirpitz. Once this had happened, the plan was to scuttle the Arthur and for the men to get on to the Norwegian coast and to head for the Swedish border. Leif Larsen, again, was selected for this mission. The Arthur its cover was a peat trader, so it was had peat all over the boat, which of course was very useful to cover all the chariots and the equipment. And of course, peat was quite a normal thing for cargo to be transported up the Norwegian coast. So this was what was done. It was an emotional moment as everyone on board and those on land at Scalloway, as the Arthur began to leave the harbour for its mission. A larger boat sounded blasted its horn in honour of the Arthur, and the Arthur replied in not quite such a loud siren or blast, but proudly. But everyone knew that the Arthur would never return. So small a ship and such an important mission ahead. So Leif Larsen bluffed his way through the German inspections as a simple, ignorant fisherman. They rounded the cliffs into the fjord where the Tirpitz was sheltering. The chariots were now down in the water, but they were hit by waves and the connection snapped and the chariots were lost. The mission had to be aborted. Of course, the Arthur still had to be scuttled. The men managed to get onto the shore as planned and headed for the Swedish border. They all got there, but just at the border, Bob Evans, who was one of the chariot divers, was shot in the leg and he was captured. The rest of them got across and back into safety. But Bob Evans was taken into hospital. He was made better, and then they shot him. Does seem a bit strange, that, doesn't it? But the crews were honoured by the British and the Norwegian governments for this operation. The Tirpitz was eventually sunk in November 1944 by Lancaster bombers from Lossiemouth in Scotland, using tall buoys developed by Barnes Wallis, who of course invented the bouncing bomb. And the tall buoys were able to penetrate the armoured plated hull of the Tirpitz. The sinking of the Tirpitz marked the end of Hitler's influential battleships and his naval war in northern waters. But now it was decided that larger boats were needed for the long trips up the northern lands. So 4 large Arctic whalers were brought in from Iceland, and the men transferred from the fishing boats to these larger Arctic whalers. And finally, a story of one of the most remarkable accounts of human survival in the world from that point. It's to do with this man. Sorry. His name was Jan Baalsrud. He sailed from Scalloway in a Shetland bus in March 1943 to Troms, north of the Arctic Circle, with 11 other men. The agents were taken there. They had the important objective to organize attacks on 2 airfields from where German planes were attacking the Arctic convoys to Russia. The boat was anchored in a little fjord, and the plan was to go to the village shop where the man there was part of the resistance, would help them at that point. But of course, without the communications we have today, there was no idea that the man had sold his shop, and the new owner of the shop had no idea what they were talking about. And so he betrayed them, and a German warship appeared. The crew in the Shetland bus set detonators with timers to explode in the hold of the boat, hoping that this would happen as the German warship came alongside and blow both ships up. But sadly, the detonators failed. The men managed to swim through chunks of ice to the beach. The only one that got further up was Jan. The rest were pinpointed down there on the beach, or pinned down on the beach, I should say, and arrested and eventually shot on Hitler's orders. So Jan alone escaped. His only hope was to get across to the Swedish border. But over the next 2 months, with the selfless help and great bravery of local people, he traveled 80 miles to the border across fields and mountains. And of course, the Gestapo were hard on his heels. And if anyone was found to be helping such a man, they would have been shot, probably their whole families, maybe the whole village, like Telav'g. So it was extremely risky helping a man like Jan. So they could never have him sleeping in their houses. They had to keep him either in snow holes or in sort of unused sort of little huts. One of the men who helped him said these amazing words: "If I live, you will live. If I die, it will be because I have died trying to save you." Some of the things that happened to Jan would have killed most men. He crossed the Lingford Mountains. He'd been wounded in the foot on landing on that beach, and his feet were becoming very badly frostbitten. At one point, he became snowblind and walked in circles, not realizing that he was close to a house that would help him at that point. He'd been hurled 300 feet in an avalanche and buried alive for 5 days. He was then, once he was being helped by the resistance, he was cocooned in these little snow holes. And in one of these snow holes, he amputated 7 of his frostbitten toes with his penknife. But he finally crossed the border with these men who took him from one resistance group to another, eventually to the Swedish border, and a nomad sledge took him across. But this photo is obviously at peacetime, because that nomad sledge was under fire from a German ski patrol in hot pursuit, but he made it across. He spent the next 2 months in hospital, and in the autumn flew back to London and reported back for duty. This is the book, We Die Alone, written by David Howarth, the second in command at Scalloway. David went back with Jan after the war and retraced his steps and met all the people that who'd helped him. I mean, it's a very harrowing book, but if you enjoy that sort of thing, which I did, I mean, it's fascinating to see how someone could survive. So there he is being dragged along, and that's more like how he was taken from one place to another. I did manage to get this book in paperback, so it is out. So I'm sure you could access it if you want. This slide shows Jan in 1945 with King Haakon. What a brave man. But in April 43, it was decision time. In the winter months of 42 and 43, 34 crewmen and 7 boats had been lost. And these losses were becoming too heavy for the operations to be sustained. Larger, faster boats were needed. President Roosevelt came to the rescue. He'd recently made a speech called Look to Norway and was eager to help. Although I've got it up there, I'll read it to you. If there's anyone who still wonders why this war is being fought, let him look at Norway. If there's anyone who has any delusions that this war could have been averted, let him look to Norway. And if there's anyone who doubts the democratic will to win, again I say, let him look to Norway. He donated 3 fast submarine chasers. The sub-chasing equipment was removed and anti-aircraft guns installed. And the men who'd moved from the fishing boats to the Arctic whalers now moved to the sub-chasers. But these boats were now really too powerful to be attacked. And this really became a true bus service. So here are some of the men that transferred across to those boats. And here is towards the end of the war, one of those sub-chasers where refugees from Norway are coming onto the pier at Scalloway. That must have been a real relief. But the war ends. Germany capitulated in May 1945, and the day that happened, the 3 sub-chasers sailed for the last time, 2 to Bergen and 1 to Aalesund. They were greeted with tremendous rejoicing. During the night before, armed Norwegian troops appeared in every Norwegian town. In Bergen, 3,000 men were under arms, wearing uniforms and carrying Sten guns, all previously brought in by the Shetland Bus. In May, Crown Prince Olav and 5 government ministers returned to liberated Norway. And on the 7th of June, King Haakon, Crown Princess Martha, and the 3 younger children stepped on to Norwegian soil, exactly 5 years to the day that they had to escape it. So what was the impact of the Shetland Bus? Actually, I should just say there is a little a YouTube clip. And what is so amazing and emotional is that the cheering just goes on and on and on. So what was the impact of the Shetland Bus? 400 tons of arms delivered, many refugees are picked up, and a network of 60 radio transmitters and operators established. It also did much to maintain the morale of the Norwegians and to give them hope. Another very important thing was that we all know about D-Day, but it's perhaps you all know, but not so well known by others, that because of all this activity in Norway, Hitler was beginning to think that maybe D-Day would happen in Norway. So 300,000 troops were deployed into Norway in case this would happen. And these men these troops were eventually to, of course, surrender to the Norwegians. But maybe it made D-Day in France a tad easier. And so let's look at Leif Larsen, the name that kept cropping up. He was the first skipper to be elected by the vote of the men, turning out to be the finest leader of them all. He didn't look the part. He was stickily built with blue eyes and a broken nose and a wide, humorous smile. He was quiet and modest, which took him through one adventure after another. He never raised his soft voice. He was always calm in adversity. At the end of the war, he was subject of legends in Norway. He had devotion amongst his crews, affection and admiration from his British colleagues. He really was an outstanding figure. And he was to become the highest decorated Allied naval officer of World War II. So here we have Jack Moore, or William Moore, who owned that marine repair yard, and Leif Larsen in Scalloway in 1985. So the Shetland Bus is remembered in Scalloway. One or two of you have been there as well. The memorial in Scalloway was unveiled in 2003. I do wonder why it took them so long to do this, but there we go. It was built of stones taken from areas in Shetland and in Scotland, because some of the missions did go from Scotland. And also stones were brought across from Norway, from the villages or towns where the men who lost their lives came from. So all those stones there all had meaning. The granite plaque, there's a plaque on this, which names of the 44 lost crewmen and the boats on that plaque. Also, the granite plaque on the slipway commemorates the visit of Crown Prince Olav in 1942, and a bronze plaque alongside, or just below it actually, states in memory of Leif Shetlands Larsen and all concerned with the Shetland Bus, there unveiled by his daughter Astrid Larsen. Wreath-laying ceremonies are conducted every year on the 17th of May. One of you were there, Derek, I think, and on Armistice Sunday as well. Our late Queen visited in 1960. So that was actually before the memorial was set up, or built, I should say. The visitor numbers are increasing annually. Here's Queen Sonia in 2007. I think I must have that wrong, because I know it was 2003 it was built. So 2007, yes, there's Queen Sonia. I was there some years ago with a group from London, and on the 17th of May, and I don't think there was a dry eye amongst us. There were many Norwegians who'd come over, especially, and a very, very moving ceremony. There was the Scottish minister who'd had quite a lot to say, and we couldn't understand much of what he was saying either. Now, the Christmas tree. Two trees are given by the city of Oslo as a token of Norwegian gratitude to the people of Great Britain for their assistance during the years 1940 to 45. Given annually since 1947, one up to Edinburgh and the other one down to Trafalgar Square. In conclusion, the Norwegians struggling in their country against the invaders were fortified by the knowledge that these small boats were constantly sailing from the Shetland Isles to land weapons and supplies and to rescue refugees. They gave these small boats the name the Shetland Bus, helping Norway bring back its peace and its pride. That's a photo that was taken during the war. I've spoken to Norwegians over the years, and it does say something like "Long live the king." And of course, no one knew who these men were. Their skis were strapped on again in those days, and off they skied. My speaker's fee today will go to the Land, Sea and Island Centre in Arisaig, which is west of Fort William. It's a little centre. It's really quite small. It sort of remembers the weaving and the fishing and that sort of thing. But that main section, you can see there top left, is to remember the SOE, because this was Arisaig was the training centre for the SOE up there in Scotland. The little black and white photo of the officer down there at middle bottom there is my father, who was the first explosives trainer up in Arisaig, and then later to be he was promoted down to Baker Street in London, and then later parachuted into France. But as you can see from the photo there on the left, it is stunning. It's one of my favorite places in the whole world. And there to the right of my father's picture or photo is the Czech memorial there, because my father trained the two men who assassinated Heydrich, those Czech soldiers there. So this centre just survives on people putting money into a pot, and as they look around, so your donation really today will go into that little pot. So to keep it going, to remember that tremendous generation. So thank you very much indeed, the Shetland Bus.
Well, thank you, Gillian. That was very, as always, excellent presentation. If you'd like to unmute yourselves by clicking on the microphone button, is there any questions for Gillian at all?
I can never think of anything to ask, so shall I see if I can stop?
Oh, Charles has got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. That was a most interesting talk. Thank you very much indeed. Did Leif Larsen receive any British honours for what he did?
Oh, yes, he did. I wonder if I've got them here. He was awarded 11 medals in total. No one else, British or foreign, received so many honours. He got the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal, Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Service Medal, and Bar Distinguished Service Order.
Sorry, quite a lot then.
Yeah, what an amazing man. You know, as I always say, a fantastic generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Yeah. So if any of you ever want to go to Arisaig, I have a few connections there, and there's one chap, actually, he's Danish, who runs that, or he volunteers. He doesn't run it. He volunteers, and he's sort of put together the SOE exhibition in the centre there, and he loves giving people the SOE tour. He'll take people to the different houses where the different nationalities were being trained. He's also found a lot of pieces of equipment in the ground. He's been, he said there's so much in the ground, having a metal detector was hopeless. So he's literally gone through the ground with his hands and picked out time pencils, fog switches, all the sort of gadgets that these men were training and used. So I have a little selection which I treasure, but it's all getting a bit rusty and old, but there we go. So good for him for remembering and helping people remember what happened up there in Scotland. And my father married a Scottish girl from that he met down in Baker Street. She was a Fanny. So I've got this connection. A very modest parents who only later on in my father's life did he begin to talk about it, and in fact wrote his book about it. But so there we go. And actually, interestingly enough, I do give this talk quite often down here in the southeast of England. And about a month ago, I met David Howarth, that man's second in command, his second wife. And a couple of weeks ago, I met his daughter. So that's a real thrill. You know, there's still a sort of a connection there, which is, I've become quite friendly with his daughter. We're about the same age, I presume, and we've both got SOE fathers, and it's great.
Jonathan.
It was just an observation, really. I
Yeah.
mean, from the picture of Lunavaux, I just looked up. I was there in May 2022. I mean, it's exactly the same now as it was then.
Mm.
So if you want to go back and see, you don't have to you can just see exactly what it was like. I think one building's moved and that's it.
Yes.
Who
Who owns Lunavaux now?
Well,
Did you own the house?
Well, as my wife and I were there, it was a very sort of bit of a gloomy day, and the farmer was ploughing a field, but he stopped and wondered what these people were doing, hanging around with a camera. And he came across, and he said, "Oh," he was very welcoming. He said, "Oh, it's just a pity," he said, "the people who own the house are away. Otherwise, you could have knocked on the well." He said, "You can knock on the door and go inside."
Yep.
What they would have thought of that, I don't know. Because you remarked also that there's an increasing interest as well. And I'm just wondering whether more and more people actually are going to go and see Lunavaux or Scalloway. It is extraordinary. I mean, you know, Slipway's still there, and you know,
Yeah.
it's well worth going if you haven't been. I mean,
Yes.
you've been, but anybody who hasn't been, it's well worth the visit.
It is. It's a stunning place, isn't
But
it?
you know, so little of it has changed.
Yes, exactly.
It's exactly as it is in the book, in David Howarth's book. So take that with you, and this with the
Yes, and actually the Scalloway Museum, which helped me with a lot of the slides and information as well, is a super museum there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And really, really good. Actually, that painting of the Shetland Bus, the lady was keen for it to go to Arisaig. So that painting the one that I, when I gave a talk in Tunbridge, from that lady found that painting in the garage. That is actually in Arisaig now. But, you know, I was pleased because what would she have done with it? Probably, I don't know, put it in a charity shop or binned it or burnt it or something.
Right, yes.
So,
But Arisaig, that's on the railway line to Mallaig, isn't it? The famous Harry
yes.
Potter line now, isn't it?
There was yes, Glenn Finnan was on the news today about repairing it. If any of you saw that, maybe on the news tonight, who knows, maybe not. But yes, it's a stunning part of the world. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so dramatic. It's just beautiful. Yeah. Have you been there, Jonathan, or not?
Yes, I think so. Many years ago. Yes,
Yeah,
I know that part of Scotland reasonably well. Yes, yeah. But, yeah.
Yes.
Good. Any more questions for Gillian? Finn or Chris, have you got anything you want to say?
They're still muted, so even
They're
if
still
they think they
muted,
can-
but well. Well, Gillian, thank you very much indeed for that. That was excellent. The next talk is on Thursday, the 28th of November, with Patrick Mercer. He's talking about Gallipoli, which we are going to go and do a tour to next year, which I'll be going on. It's one of my ambitions to go to Gallipoli. So that's the next talk coming up. But Gillian, again, thank you very much indeed. And thank you everybody for turning up. Really, really good.
Many thanks.
All righty.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Good evening.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.